In 2025, President Trump put high taxes, called tariffs, on goods from other countries like Mexico, Canada, and China. These tariffs were meant to be 25% on many products, making foreign goods much more expensive for Americans to buy. The idea was to force people to buy American products instead, which would help American farmers and businesses. However, this plan backfired in a spectacular way that nobody expected. The tariffs were supposed to protect American agriculture and give farmers a competitive advantage. Trump and his supporters believed that by making foreign wheat more expensive, countries would have no choice but to buy American wheat. They thought American farmers would have a field day and make lots of money from increased sales. Unfortunately, the opposite happened, and American wheat farmers found themselves in the worst situation they had faced in decades. Before we continue with this incredible story, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to stay updated on global trade and economic news that affects everyone. Your support helps us bring you more in-depth analysis of these important events. The big problem. Other countries got angry about these tariffs and decided to stop buying American wheat entirely. Instead of accepting higher prices, they found new suppliers and started buying wheat from Canada, Australia, and other countries. This wasn't just a small change, it was a massive shift that happened very quickly. The problem was that Trump's administration didn't understand how global trade really works. When you put tariffs on other countries, they often respond by putting tariffs on your products too. This is called retaliation, and it's exactly what happened. Countries like China, Mexico, and others decided they didn't want to deal with American trade uncertainty anymore. What made things worse was that these countries didn't just stop buying American wheat temporarily, they completely changed their buying patterns and found new long-term suppliers. Once a country sets up new trade relationships and supply chains, it's very hard to win them back, even if the tariffs are removed later. How bad was it? The situation became desperate for American wheat farmers very quickly. Countries that used to buy millions of tons of American wheat stopped their orders almost overnight. American farmers suddenly had huge piles of wheat they couldn't sell to anyone. The wheat just sat there, taking up space and costing money to store. Some farmers had to make the heartbreaking decision to burn their wheat crops because no one would buy them. Imagine working all year to grow wheat, only to have to destroy it because there are no buyers. Other farmers plowed their wheat back into the ground, not out of anger, but out of resignation. They simply had no other choice. Wheat storage buildings across America were overflowing with grain nobody wanted. In Kansas, inland ports that used to be busy with wheat shipments became ghostly quiet. In North Dakota, trains that usually carried wheat to ports just sat idle before eventually leaving empty. The entire wheat supply chain ground to a halt. By June 2025, U.S. wheat stocks reached 15 million metric tons, much higher than anyone expected. This was a clear sign that demand had collapsed. The markets were filled with fear that tariffs would completely destroy American wheat trade forever. Who stopped buying American wheat? The list of countries that abandoned American wheat reads like a who's who of major wheat importers around the world. The Philippines was one of the most shocking losses. This country had been incredibly loyal to American wheat for decades, buying almost 90% of their wheat from the United States, nearly 3 million tons every year. But in 2025, that loyalty disappeared almost overnight. They quietly cancelled big contracts worth thousands of tons and started buying from Canada and Australia instead. A 12,000-ton contract vanished, and another deal 10 times bigger went to Canada. Filipino buyers said that even though American wheat might be cheaper, it was no longer worth the risk. France was another major loss that hurt American farmers deeply. France is a country where bread isn't just food, it's part of their culture and heritage. French baguettes had been made with American wheat for decades, but they stopped depending on wheat from Kansas and switched to Canada. French buyers complained that American wheat didn't meet their chemical standards, had incomplete paperwork, and was becoming too unpredictable at customs. Canadian wheat, on the other hand, always met European Union standards perfectly. South Korea had bought American wheat for 40 years, but everything changed when they implemented new safety rules. American wheat contained too much glyphosate, a chemical used in farming, that Korea didn't allow in their food. Between late 2024 and mid-2025, America's share of the Korean wheat market crashed from 35% to just 17%. Korean companies quietly removed American wheat from their contracts and switched to Canadian suppliers who followed stricter safety rules. Mexico was perhaps the most surprising loss because they're America's neighbor and supposed friend. Mexico had been buying over 3 million tons of American wheat annually. but they cut their purchases by 40% and replaced them with Canadian and Argentine wheat. Mexican buyers got tired of constant delays, changing tariffs, and bureaucratic problems when dealing with American suppliers. They valued Canadian consistency and reliability over the chaos of American trade policy. China, the world's biggest wheat buyer, also turned away from American wheat. When China faced heat waves in their main grain-growing regions, they chose to buy Canadian and Australian wheat instead of American. Chinese traders bought 200,000 tons of Canadian high-grade wheat, and one trader explained that Chinese buyers were actively avoiding American wheat because of tariffs and the trade war. Why did countries choose Canada? Countries didn't just stop buying American wheat, they actively chose Canada as their new supplier for several important reasons. Better quality control, Canadian wheat was consistently cleaner and met international safety standards. Canada's wheat is almost entirely GMO-free, not genetically modified, which matters a lot in markets like Europe and Japan where people prefer natural crops. Canadian farmers also use fewer chemicals and follow stricter rules about pesticide use. More reliable service, Canadian wheat shipments arrived exactly on time with all the proper paperwork completed correctly. There were no delays, no missing documents, and no surprises. Countries could count on Canadian suppliers to deliver exactly what they promised, when they promised it. Lower total costs, even though Canadian wheat might cost the same as American wheat. There were no tariffs or trade war risks to worry about. This made Canadian wheat cheaper overall because buyers didn't have to pay extra taxes or worry about sudden policy changes. Advanced technology, Canada used cutting-edge farming technology that impressed international buyers. They used satellites to monitor their wheat fields, drones to spot problems early, and AI, artificial intelligence, tools to ensure grain quality. GPS-guided tractors and harvesters made sure every seed was planted and harvested efficiently. Environmental responsibility, Canada's farming practices focused on protecting the environment, which was important to many buyers. Canadian farmers practice no-till farming, which protects soil, crop rotation, which keeps land healthy, and carbon sequestration, which helps fight climate change. Many countries now require their suppliers to meet environmental standards. Political stability, perhaps most importantly, buyers saw Canada as a politically stable country that wouldn't suddenly change trade policies or start trade wars. They could make long-term contracts with Canadian suppliers without worrying about political drama disrupting their food supply. What Canada did right. Canada didn't just get lucky, they made smart strategic decisions that helped them take advantage of America's mistakes. Canadian farmers quickly recognized the opportunity and planted more wheat when they saw American farmers struggling. They increased their wheat growing area by 2.6% in just 1 year, adding about 500,000 acres of new wheat fields. This was the first meaningful increase in Canadian wheat acreage in years. The Canadian government quietly supported this shift by creating new farm programs that provided funding and crop insurance help to wheat growers. They wanted to protect their agricultural industry from foreign trade shocks and help farmers make the transition from other crops to wheat. Canada invested heavily in modern farming technology. They used drones and satellite sensors to monitor wheat fields and spot pest outbreaks or nutrient deficiencies early. GPS-driven planters and harvesters ensured that every seed was planted and collected efficiently. These innovations helped Canadian farmers produce higher yields while using less fertilizer and fuel. Canada also built better infrastructure to handle increased wheat exports. They upgraded their railway systems and ports to ship grain more efficiently overseas. The Port of Prince Rupert, for example, opened a new grain terminal with a $1 billion investment that doubled the port's capacity. This port is actually closer to Asian markets than American West Coast ports, giving Canadian wheat a shipping advantage. Perhaps most importantly, Canada made smart trade deals that gave them better access to international markets. The Canada-EU Trade Agreement, CETA, allowed Canadian wheat to enter European markets with zero tariffs. While American wheat still faced various fees and restrictions, Canada also expanded trade deals with Asian countries, opening new markets for their farmers. The results? The contrast between American and Canadian farmers by mid-2025 couldn't have been more dramatic. For American farmers, the situation became desperate very quickly. Wheat prices fell as demand collapsed, and many farmers couldn't make enough money to cover their costs. Storage facilities sat empty while farmers struggled to pay their bills. Many farmers switched to growing corn and soybeans instead of wheat because these crops were more profitable. The emotional and financial stress on American farming communities was enormous. Rural towns that depended on wheat farming saw their local economies collapse. Banks reported that many farmers were taking on more debt just to survive, and loan defaults increased for the sixth straight quarter. Some farmers described holding their breath until harvest time, knowing they would face huge losses. U.S. wheat growing area fell to its lowest level since 1970. As one North Dakota farmer said, "You just can't convince guys to grow wheat these days when corn and soybeans were making hundreds of dollars more per acre." The crop that had once been reliable and profitable became a symbol of American agricultural decline. For Canadian farmers were in much better spirits and financial condition. In Saskatchewan and Alberta, farmers joked that the constant rain and moisture were a welcome change from previous droughts. "We've been dreaming of this kind of crop," one Saskatchewan wheat grower told local media. Canadian wheat production jumped to about 35 million tons, up 6.4% from the previous year, with exports rising to roughly 26.5 million tons. Grain elevators were full, export contracts were solid, and farmers enjoyed good profit margins. The success was so dramatic that Canada became the world's third largest wheat exporter. The Canadian government was also pleased with the results. Agriculture Minister Heath MacDonald noted that while Canada was facing trade challenges, the country maintained a strong global position as a wheat exporter. He assured farmers that the government would keep markets open and continue supporting the agricultural sector. The bottom line? Trump's tariffs were supposed to help American farmers but ended up hurting them badly in ways that nobody anticipated. Countries that had bought American wheat for decades quickly found new suppliers in Canada and built new relationships that will last for years. The most important lesson from this story is that in today's connected world, trade wars can backfire and hurt the very people they're meant to help. When countries impose tariffs, other nations often respond by finding alternative suppliers rather than paying higher prices. Even if the tariffs were removed tomorrow, many countries have already changed their buying habits and supply chains. It takes years to rebuild trust in international trade, and some relationships may never be repaired. As one analyst noted, even if US policy were to change tomorrow, many customers will have already rewritten their supply chains. This wheat trade story shows how quickly global commerce can change when countries start trade wars, and how other nations can benefit from these disputes. Canada's success came not just from America's mistakes, but from their own smart planning, better technology, and commitment to reliable service. Key numbers: US wheat stocks, 15 million tons, higher than expected, showing weak demand. Canada's wheat production, up 6.4% in 1 year to 35 million tons. Canada's wheat exports rose to 26.5 million tons. Philippines dropped US wheat purchases dramatically, switching to Canada. South Korea, US market share fell from 35% to 17%. Mexico cut US wheat purchases by 40%. Canadian wheat acreage increased by 2.6%, 500,000 acres. EU wheat exports from Canada surged by 40% in 1 year. US spring wheat acreage fell to lowest level since 1970.